DPL surveillance equipment. Um, I'm wiping down my car and reviewing today's content. Looks like it's going to be a nice day out today. Me and my wife are probably just going to hang out, spend some Bitcoin, and run some errands, and just basically take it easy. We don't do much on Tuesdays, except go out and stuff our faces and run some errands and pick up things off our to-do list or whatever. So pretty laid-back lifestyle. In between traveling inside and outside the United States, that's what we do. We come home and spend a certain amount of time just doing the normal routine things, and then we try to intersperse that with day trips until the bigger vacation trips come about, and then we go on the longer trips. But yeah, typically we just try to occupy our times and getting caught up, getting grounded again, and taking care of things personal wise until it's time to go back on a vacation or something. Let me introduce myself. My name is Monty Henry, owner of DPL Surveillance Equipment. I run a full-service surveillance and security equipment company. We have lifetime guarantees and warranties on all the products. We have 24/7, 365 tech sales and customer support. We have the largest inventory of items that not only can you buy, but you can rent as well. I think we're going to get in some noise, encountering some noise here. Let me see how long it lasts. The largest inventory of items that not only can you buy, but you can rent as well. Feel free to take advantage of reading all the articles, listening to the podcast, reading the blogs, watching the demonstration videos. When you shop on the website, feel free to use your Bitcoin and your Litecoin and your Ethereum. They've been integrated into the shopping cart. And the website is newly designed, just designed it not long ago, and should be easy to navigate. If you have any suggestions or encounter any problems, of course, don't hesitate to let me know. Now, let's see, going right into today's topic. Oh, yeah, before I forget, make sure you guys understand we don't want to feed into the system of utilizing MasterCard and Visa and American Express and those guys. They simply rip us off and they allow customers to abuse their credit card privileges. You get too many disputes, too many chargebacks, and customers will definitely take advantage. Even the default rates on credit card loans are going up. So a lot of people just are not being responsible with their credit cards. Just too much debt out there. There's $13.3 trillion alone in household debt. So a lot of people are just not in a good position as they were before, and they're abusing the credit card privileges mainly because they're not managing their finances responsibly. So moving right into today's topic. Let's see, what is today's topic? The formal name of the article. What is that called again? It's called The 5G Race. China and U.S. Battle to Control World's Fastest Wireless Internet. Again, it's called The 5G Race. China and United States Battle to Control World's Fastest Wireless Internet. At stake are billions of dollars in royalties, a head start in developing new technologies and national security. The early waves of mobile communication were largely driven by American and European companies, as the next era of 5G approaches, promising to again transform the way people use the internet. A battle is on to determine whether the U.S. or China will dominate. Equipment makers and telecom operators in both countries are rushing to test and roll out the next generation of wireless networks, which will be as much as 100 times faster than the current 4G standard. Governments are involved as well as with China making the bigger push. The new networks are expected to enable the steering of driverless cars and doctors to perform complex surgeries remotely. They could power connected appliances and the so-called Internet of Things, and virtual and augmented reality. Towers would beam high-speed internet to devices, reducing reliance on cables and Wi-Fi. At the Shenzhen headquarters of Huawei Technologies, executives and researchers gathered in July to celebrate one of its technologies being named a critical part of 5G. The man who invented it, Turkish scientist Erdal Erkan, was greeted with thunderous applause. The win meant a stream of future royalties and leverage for the company, and it marked a milestone in China's quest to dominate the technology. At a Verizon Communications lab in Bedminster, New Jersey recently, computer screens showed engineers how glare-resistant window coatings can interfere with delivering 5G super-fast internet into homes. A model of a head known as Mrs. Head tested the audio quality of new wireless devices. Verizon began experimenting with 5G in 11 markets last year. Nearby in Murray Hill, New Jersey, Nokia Corp engineers are testing a 5G-compatible sleeve that factory workers could wear like an arm brace during their shifts to steer drones or monitor their vital signs. The company began its 5G-related research in 2007. While the economics of 5G are still being worked out, boosters say the potential payoffs are immense. Companies that own patents stand to make billions of dollars in royalties. Countries with the largest and most reliable networks will have a head start in developing the technologies enabled by faster speeds. The dominant equipment suppliers could give national intelligence agencies and militaries an advantage in spying and are disrupting rival countries' networks. I just want to comment real quick. When it comes to spying and disrupting rival countries' networks, it's been well known and documented that, unfortunately, excuse the noise, you guys, a lot of equipment providers are compelled by their local governments and law enforcement agencies to compromise their equipment to allow for backdoors and embedded software that, unfortunately could be triggered to allow for, again, remote monitoring and surveillance, turning on, turning off technologies. These are some of the ways that you use that equipment and such to spy, just in case it wasn't obvious in that article. As we face the future, we know deep down that the birth of 5G standards represents a new beginning, says Huawei's chairman Eric Yu told the audience at the company event. Hans Vestberg, Verizon's chief executive officer, speaks of the technology in equally dramatic terms. We are strong believers that 5G will have a very transformative effect on many things in our society, he said. Consumer, media, entertainment, whole industries. By some measure, China is ahead. Since 2013, a government-led committee has worked with China's mobile carriers and gear makers on testing and developing. The state-led approach, combined with an enormous domestic market, ensures that Chinese companies such as Huawei will sell large quantities of 5G equipment and gain valuable experience in the process. I think this is important to note, mainly because when you have a marketplace of like 1 billion citizens, and you roll out different technologies, you do get a lot of experience in terms of what works and what doesn't work. So that's very important. A very important advantage in China as they roll out these new technologies. They get to experiment on a large-scale basis as compared to the United States. We have these very small regional test markets which don't yield as much information. They're not totally useless, but they don't yield as much results as compared to the large-scale rollouts that you get like in China. In the United States, also they're talking about a state-led approach. China typically gets behind its corporations. They have what's basically called a managed type of economy, pretty much. So that means government basically dictates to corporations or their corporations what and how things are going to be done, as compared to the United States, just basically letting each and every company fend on its own. So some may believe that it's better when the government is actually has some sort of sense of direction, where they channel money, they channel resources, they channel the efforts of corporate America and the United States, for better or for worse. We don't do so much in the way of leading from the government level. The government basically responds and reacts to, if anything, the government's actions are dictated by industry through the lobbyists and the special interest groups and all that. So it's almost actually like the opposite of what China is doing, for better or for worse. In the United States, where the government typically avoids mandating and coordinating efforts by the private sector, much of the experimentation has been led by companies such as AT&T, Verizon, Samsung Electronics, and Nokia. Last week, tech companies, including Intel Corporation, Cisco Systems Incorporated, argued in comments filed to the United States Trade Representative that proposed tariffs would raise the cost of routers, switchers, and other goods, slowing development of 5G. 3 of the major carriers plan to roll out 5G service in select cities later this year, though most mobile devices compatible with the new network won't be ready until early 2019. Let's see. The race to 5G has come with tit-for-tat regulatory moves aimed at securing each country's advantage. In March, the Trump administration blocked Singapore-based Broadcom's acquisition of U.S. chip giant and 5G leader Qualcomm, citing concerns that Broadcom would cut the company's research and development funds, allowing Chinese companies to pull ahead in 5G. In July, China squelched Qualcomm's planned acquisition of Dutch chipmaker NXP Semiconductors NV, a deal that would have helped Qualcomm profit from 5G investments in new markets such as connected cars. So it looks like China is doing in the United States, as far as acquisitions are concerned, what the United States is doing to Chinese companies that may get an advantage in the United States. So the Qualcomm deal was scrapped, and the NXP Qualcomm deal in China was scrapped, it looked like. Much of the U.S. unease stems from the rising clout of Huawei, which was labeled a national security threat along with ZTE Corporation by a congressional panel in 2012 that said those firms' equipment could be used for spying on Americans. In August, aligning itself with the U.S., Australia said it was banning Huawei and ZTE equipment from its 5G network. Other U.S. allies are studying similar bans. Huawei and ZTE constantly deny providing equipment agencies with backdoor access to their products. Beijing has likewise pushed to replace or sideline U.S. technology firms with China's network within China's networks on fears of espionage. China has made 5G a priority after failing to keep pace with Western countries in developing previous generations of mobile networks. The U.S. dominated 4G, built in the late 2000s, much in the same way Europeans controlled 3G standards. The American lead in 4G has been a boon to companies such as Apple and Qualcomm, and helped give rise to a host of consumer smartphone applications from the United States. Since 2015, China has built around 350,000 cell sites, compared with fewer than 30,000 in the United States. According to an August study by consulting firm Deloitte, it also noted China has 14.1 sites for every 10,000 people, compared with 4.7 in the United States. That matters for 5G because the new networks will require much larger numbers of cell sites than 4G. The physical manifestation of China's push is a government-run 5G lab near the Great Wall north of Beijing. The sprawling facility is festooned with base stations and prototype mobile devices with indoor and outdoor facilities for each of the major Chinese carriers and equipment makers. according to engineers and executives who visited the site. Trials are coordinated by a consortium of tech firms, universities, and research institutes that operate under China's Ministry of Industry and Information Technology. The group aims to wrap up tests by the end of this year. After those trials conclude, state-run carrier China Mobile, the world's largest mobile operator by subscribers, will follow up with its own tests in 17 cities, according to Chen Li, a former Bell Labs researcher and the company's chief scientist of mobile technologies. China's 5G service is expected to be ready for commercial use by 2020. The faster generation of networks relies upon sophisticated technology that allows wireless airwaves to be used more efficiently. Plans call for it to run on high-frequency millimeter waves, which can handle more data but can't travel as far as lower-frequency waves used by older networks. That means 5G will rely on clusters of antenna as well as decentralized data centers close to consumers and businesses, requiring big investments in infrastructure. The networks are expected to have the speed and the responsiveness needed for advances such as driverless cars, which must instantaneously communicate with traffic signals and other cars and their surroundings. I just want to say that the health hazards, the health hazards of high-frequency millimeter waves needs to be fleshed out and talked about, in addition to bombarding more people with cell towers and such and that are in closer proximity. This is a requirement of 5G, as they mentioned in this sentence regarding clusters of antenna placed all over the place. They have to be closer to you as compared to the traditional networks that we have right now, which are more spread out. So you're going to have more of a problem with being bombarded with wireless signals going forward. Let's see, where were we? China's bid to steer the 5G future depends heavily on setting technical standards the rest of the world will have to follow and pay royalties and licensing fees to use. It has played an aggressive role in the international telecom industry collective that sets global standards. So it looks like, the United States had its time with dominance of 4G. Europe had its time with dominance of 3G. And now China just may very well have its time with 5G. That's the way it appears so far. Experts inside and outside China expect Qualcomm and other Western firms to end up with a majority of the essential patents once the standards are fully determined, but China is making progress. In 2009, as Huawei's 5G push began, it recruited Tong Wen, a former senior researcher at now-defunct equipment maker Nortel Networks Corporation, to set up a research lab in Ottawa. While flipping through an academic journal, Mr. Tong had stumbled on polar coding, a novel method for correcting errors in data transmission invented by Mr. Erkan, the Turkish scientist. Huawei poured resources into developing it, and the government leaned on Chinese companies to vote for it en masse at a key standard-setting meeting at the Pepper Mill Resort in Reno, Nevada in 2016. The result was a tense fight that lasted past midnight with proponents of a rival technology favored by most Western firms, according to one standards expert who was there. I just want to say this polar coding technology reminds me of when Qualcomm first discovered CDMA. It became a dominant method of compressing data, and so that we could have fast delivery of phone calls and data over the networks. And this polar coding seems to be just as revolutionary in the way it's implemented. And this Mr. Erkan is probably going to do very well since he's the scientist behind the polar coding. The Chinese decided this was important. The expert said this was one of the biggest political battles we've ever seen. The meeting ended with a compromise. Polar codes will be adopted for part of the standard, giving Huawei ownership of a critical patent. The company has spent more than $1 billion on 5G research and development so far. I think the amount of money that China is committing is very, very important in this particular context, mainly because, as you're going to see, the United States is not spending as much. Between government and private between the government and private sector, we were only coming up with $100 million as compared to $1 billion. Major difference. The U.S. government has stopped short of mandating efforts by the private sector, opening the door to more diffuse outcomes determined by the work of individual companies. In January, a senior national security official floated the idea of rivaling Beijing with a government-led effort to build a nationalized wireless network, but regulators and officials said it was too expensive and unrealistic. Earlier this month, the Federal Communications Commission announced a plan to speed up the build-out of 5G networks by overriding some local rules and fees governing the deployment of small cellular transmitters, an important component of the infrastructure. The plan is expected to win approval in late September. So it looks like the United States is just a little bit conflicted in terms of whether or not it wants a government-led approach or an industry-led approach. But either way, China is going ahead with their government-led approach with tons and tons of money behind it. The government has funded some academic research that has paved the way for commercial technologies. One agency, the National Science Foundation, is coordinating an effort to build test beds for 5G and future generations of wireless networks. The United States is very much behind in this space relative to Europe, South Korea, Japan, and China, said a 2015 internal NSF report on 5G network development. Tyaga Nandagopal, a former researcher at Bell Labs, who was a director at the foundation, is leading the testbed project in which companies, academics, and government agencies will be able to test 5G and other wireless network applications in tandem. Nearly 30 European and Asian companies have committed $50 million of capital and equipment over the next 7 years, while the U.S. government is pledged to invest another $50 million. In New York, an NSF-funded site run by academic institutions, including Columbia University, aims to launch a small pilot phase by the beginning of January. So it looks like there's 30 European and Asian companies committing $50 million. You know, that's not even $1 million apiece. So yeah, this is kind of pathetic in terms of what Huawei and the Chinese government is committing. Mr. Nandapakal said Chinese coordinated investments have put it in a pretty good pole position, but that the NSF's efforts are focused on wireless developments after 2020 rather than the early years of 5G deployment. We can invest our money strategically and still get better results than anyone else, he said. Some American telecom companies are staking claims to rooftops, light poles, where they can position small cells that enable the faster networks and pressing equipment and device makers to create 5G-compatible products. For all the investment, industry experts note the standards for 5G aren't fully written, and wireless carriers are still figuring out how they can best profit from the service. At a 5G forum in Santa Clara, California in July, Henning Shoziran, a former chief technology officer at the FCC, said operators would also have to find a way to drastically reduce the cost of data to make applications such as augmented or virtual reality affordable enough to sell consumers over 5G. Some of those applications could work using 4G or Wi-Fi instead. Who's going to stream AR or VR if it's going to cost them $10 per minute, he said. John Donovan, chief executive of AT&T's communication business, said the company's researchers have been among the most prolific writers of 5G standards, but it's being cautious as it puts the technology in the field. To deploy technology in advance of need before the use cases are there, you're wasting your money, he said. Executives at Huawei have also sought to temper 5G expectations before an audience of analysts at an annual meeting at the Shenzhen headquarters in April. Mr. Yu, Huawei's chairman, said the entire industry and also governments around the world have regarded 5G too high to the extent that it's going to be the digital infrastructure for everything. Huawei and China Mobile will push ahead with 5G on a large scale regardless, according to executives from both companies. 5G is such an important strategic project for China, kitchen sink all the resources, said Edison Lee, a telecom analyst at investment bank Jefferies in Hong Kong, because if they get their foot in the door for 5G, they get their foot in the door for 6G, 7G, and 8G. So again, quoting, who is this? Quoting, I think it's a Huawei executive. this guy is saying 5G is such an important strategic investment for China. Kitchen sink all the resources. Said Edison Lee, a telecom analyst at investment bank Jefferies in Hong Kong. Because if they get their foot in the door for 5G, they get their foot in the door for 6G, 7G, and 8G. Anyway, that's the end of that article. Just want to let you guys know 5G is on the board, and it's coming. It's going to be a predominant technology either from China, based out of China, or based out of the United States. It depends on whether or not Qualcomm or Huawei or whoever dominates the majority of the patents. We need to look at this from a perspective of security and health concerns. 5G saturates neighborhoods and cities with lots of cell towers and such, and transmitters, and we don't know what the security aspects are going to be, as far as making sure that the conversations and the data are safe. So anyway, just want to get this article out there, you guys, and let you know that keep your eyes and ears open and stay safe out there. Okay, we'll talk later. Bye.